Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Diogo Pinheiro. I'm the Assistant Director of CURCA, and with me here today is Alison Grandal. She runs CURCA essentially. She's the program coordinator. Most of the stuff that we do runs through her, and together we're here to talk to you about our Fuse program for this year. Um, and so, right off the bat, it's important for us to talk about what is Fuse, right, and what we can do with Fuse and what we're interested in with Fuse. So we are the undergraduate research office, right? The center. So we are interested in providing undergraduates with research opportunities, right? We are not the National Science Foundation. We are not the NIH. We are not any of these external funding agencies. And what I mean by that is that from our point of view, what we're trying to get out of this money here is a good experience for our undergraduate students, right? So it's not about whether you have a Nobel Prize winning idea, it's about whether you're going to have an idea that's really going to engage our students in a way for them to become better researchers, better people in their field, right? And so to talk about this, we have to start by talking about what is undergraduate research, right? And the basic definition is an inquiry or investigation conducted by an undergraduate student that makes an original, intellectual, or creative contribution to the discipline, right? And so here, it's important to emphasize that we're talking about not just research in the traditional, hard science fields. We are also talking about, projects that are creative in the arts and in the humanities. So it doesn't have to be strictly that sort of like a stereotype of a lab science, right? As long as it's intellectual and creative and being performed by our undergraduate students, that counts under undergraduate research, the thing that we're trying to foster, right? And so what the Fuse program does is that uh, we faculty will apply for this. And if they are awarded, they are going to get funding for these 8 weeks during the summer, where they are going to work closely with their students so that their students gain professional development, presentation experience, research experience, right? And alongside this 8 week program, there will be group meetings and student workshops, and we expect all faculty to attend all the group meetings, right? Uh, I know sometimes it can be, summer, you might not be here, but we do expect you to be there in person for these 4 group meetings because it's part of that socialization that we're trying to provide our students, right? And so through Fuse, you can hire students to work up to 40 hours per week, right? They're going to be paid for those 8 weeks, working up to 40 hours per week, right? And you can divide that 40 hours however you see fit, right? It can be one full-time student, 2 students at 20 hours, 4 students at 10 hours, right? It is up to you to decide what specific configuration is interesting to you for your project, right? And so, uh, in terms of how many projects we select, we have averaged about 6 research groups total every summer. The compensation happens through the summer, right? So it's $4,000 stipend for the professor. Students make 11.20 an hour. We're trying to change that a little bit to make it a little bit more competitive. And then we are going to be uh, giving you $500 for supplies, right? Things that you might need to your for your research project, right? Now, as I mentioned, with just like with the students, since you can split it among different students, the stipend can also be split among different professors, right? So it's going to be 2 professors running a Fuse program. They can split the $4,000 however they see fit, and so on and so forth, right? So we have lots of flexibility here so that we can go for what makes sense for your specific project. In terms of our timeline, the applications are due February 10th by midnight. After that, we are going to kind of put together a panel of reviewers from different departments, and we hope to make a decision so that by early March or so, you would know if you've been awarded. And then after we handle all the paperwork, we would be able to start hiring students around April, right? And then the program itself would run from June 2nd to July 25th with some sort of poster event at the end of the program here, right? So applications are going to be handled through InfoReady, right? So if you go through our InfoReady webpage, ung.infoready4.com, you can see the Fuse 2025 competition there. And so you're going to write your application there, and you're going to submit it there by February 10th. And the idea here is going to be that that you're going to write your application with a general audience in mind, right? Because the people reviewing your application may not necessarily be the in your field, in your area of expertise, right? So in terms of the application itself, what you're going to submit is going to be a project narrative that's going to be 3 pages maximum. This project narrative should have a project description, a significance, a long-term contribution to UNG, the plan for your faculty-student collaboration, goals and expected products in a timeline. Besides that, there should be a budget, and there should be the staff template for student researcher job description. And if you've gotten a Fuse award from us before, we expect to see something there about previous productivity and previous funding opportunities, right? And then certifications, right? Check this box to certify that you agree with certain things, right? So I'm going to go through this rubric here and finish with the application process, and then at the end we can handle any Q&A that you might have about the details. So just to make sure that we have kind of one straight shot here, I'll finish and then we'll have Q&A. So in terms of the project narrative, there's going to be certain things that we expect in this to see in that project narrative, and we are going to have a rubric that you should really pay close attention to, because the way that we do this is we are going to get all your applications, and then we're going to share it with our reviewer panel, and they are going to be instructed to go strictly by the rubric. So it is a good idea to be familiar with the rubric and to essentially write to the rubric, right? So the first item in the rubric that we're going to use to evaluate submissions is going to be about the project description, right? And the good project, an exceptional project description is going to have clear, concise, and easy to understand language. Remember, it's not necessarily going to be people from your field who are going to be reading your proposal. It's going to have, it's going to make the case for why the project is original, innovative, creative. It's going to have a good description of the methodology that's going to make sense, and it's going to be complete. In other words, people are not going to be guessing what you're going to be doing. They're going to have a clear idea what they're going to be doing. And it's going to show that you have mastered the field in some way, right? And so that's going to be worth about a time and a half the raw score, right? So you can score 0 through 12 essentially in this item. But the idea here is that you're describing your project in a way that makes sense, that makes it clear that it's a good, original, creative project that you have in hands. Besides the project description, we're going to be looking at significance, and this one is straight up a one-time multiplier, right? So it's 0 through 8. And here it's about you making the case for why your project is significant in your field, right? And again, keep in mind that the people who might be reading this might not be in your field. So you will have to write why this research topic that you have is important to your field. How will other people benefit from the knowledge? How is it going to make a contribution uh, how does it fit into perhaps local, regional, national debates, right? And so here significance is important, right? And keep in mind that it doesn't have to be strictly scientific significance, right? It can be practical significance as well, right? Oh, I'm taking this big idea that has been verified in many other places, and I'm trying to apply them to North Georgia, and it would be good for North Georgia because of X, Y, and Z, right? So that's another item in the rubric. The next item in the rubric is a long-term contribution to UNG, and here we're thinking about how this project can set up a greater culture of collaboration between faculty and students, how this will set up perhaps a laboratory, a process, something that can be repeatable, something that will have a long-term effect to UNG besides just this specific summer. And so uh, the idea here is that you're showing that it's going to be a project that can have lasting effects for UNG, right? And so again, here it's up to you to make the case for an audience that's not necessarily in your field. Next, and perhaps most important of all, it's going to be your plan for your faculty-student collaboration. This here is worth twice as much as the regular items in the rubric. And this here is what really you should have a very good idea about, right? Because, as I said, we are the undergraduate research office. Our goal here as the undergraduate research office is to provide our students with enriching, interesting opportunities so that they become better researchers, better professionals in their field, that sort of thing, right? And so let's say you have an idea that will win the Nobel Prize, but all the student is doing is cleaning up your petri dishes in the lab. Well, from our perspective, however many Nobel Prizes you're going to get out of that, from our perspective, that's not necessarily a good project, right? Because we want students to be engaged in some way, right? And so the best version of this is one where the plan for the undergraduates is they're going to be clearly involved. They're not going to be just observing or repeating menial tasks. They're going to be helping drive the project forward. Maybe they can ask their own questions. They can carve out a part of the project so to be of something that they're going to control, right? So in other words, they're going to have some form of creative input in the project, right? And so here it's important to be able to describe how you're going to achieve that sort of collaboration and mentorship with your students, right? Because again, what we are trying to get out of this as the undergraduate research center, right, is going to be a clear involvement of students in a way that it's enriching for the students. And so that's why this item in the rubric is worth twice as much points as the other items, right? Next, we have goals and expected products. And here by goals and expected products, we mean, uh, are you planning to publish your results somewhere? Are you planning on uh, uh, presenting at conferences? Are these conferences going to be national, regional, etc.? What are you trying to do with the results of this particular research? And here, it's important to note that there's going to be a balancing act that you have to achieve, right? You don't want to overpromise, right? Because we're going to talk about previous productivity in a second, but what the idea here is that if you overpromise and you don't come anywhere close to fulfilling your promises, uh, we might kind of flag your applications for future funding so that we restrict stuff, right? So if you say, hey, I'm going to publish 10 articles in top tier publications, and you end up with just one conference presentation, it's something that we would make a note of, right? So it's important to not overpromise, but it's also important to promise enough things that will be competitive in the face of other applications, right? So think about realistic goals that would be interesting here, right? Can this lead to a publication? Can this lead to conference presentations? Can this lead to some sort of outcome that we can verify, right? So describe these goals but again, describe these goals with the knowledge that we will check to see progress towards those goals at the end. And then the last item in the rubric is going to be timeline, right? Here, it's worth less than all the other items, right? It's worth half as many points. But here, what we're going to see is essentially that you have a timeline in mind that makes it so that the program is feasible within the time allotted, right? In other words, can you do the thing that you're promising to do in the 8 weeks over the summer, right? If you can, great. If you can't, then we will have to think hard about how feasible the project is. So the timeline here would be a detailed description of like week 1, week 5, week 10, the rest of the year, etc., of what you expect to accomplish by then, and so that we can see that you have a realistic program in mind. So that's the rubric. Besides the rubric, something else that is important to understand, and something that's kind of new this year, is we've changed the way that we deal with people who have been previously funded for FUSE. So if you have been previously funded for FUSE, we expect to see a report of your productivity and development of your previously funded CURCA projects, right? And here, what we're doing this time, it used to be that we would have a different rubric for people who had won FUSE before versus people who are new applicants. But here, what we are looking for is that you have a summary of the goals and projects that you were expecting from the last time that you were funded, and what you actually achieved the last time that it was funded, so that we can keep track, right? We don't want people to just start over-promising on the productivity part and never coming close to delivering it. Here, of course, there's going to be margin for error, right? You wanted to submit something for publication and you did, but it got rejected. We understand, right? But if you promised 5 publications and you never even submitted one, then we'll kind of take that into account. And so besides this kind of comparing proposed products and outcomes with what you achieved, the other thing that we want to see in the previous productivity part is a description of your previous project and how this new one is different from that one, right? So a 2-page maximum description of the previous project and how that one is different from this one is important, because we don't want to just keep funding the exact same project again and again. If it builds in a previous project, that's fine, but then describe how it builds. How is this one better, different, more involved, so on and so forth, right? How it extends, so because we don't want to just be like, oh, every summer we're going to fund the exact same program again and again, right? And so it's okay for us to fund continuing research, but we want to see some sort of evolution from the previous research, right? And so if you've been funded through FUSE before, make sure that you submit this 2-page description of productivity and development of the previous CURCA-funded projects, so that we can compare the two to make sure that A, you're not over-promising in terms of products and expected outputs, and B, that it's something that's new, that's something that's original, that it's not just let's do the same thing over again, right? So in terms of how we are going to score these rubrics, as you can see, project description is worth 1.5, plan for collaboration is worth 2 times, and so we add these all up to a maximum of 56 points, right? If you get a 0 in any of these, right, you can score maximum and everything else, but you get a 0 in any of these because you either didn't submit or didn't address or didn't include, that proposal would not be funded, right? So keep that in mind. In terms of, so that we're going to be judging you, evaluating you based on that project narrative, but we also expect to see a budget submitted. If you're going to be buying materials, buying resources, software, whatever, the budget limit is $500, right? And we expect to see a detailed budget divided by categories of the things that you're hoping to purchase with those funds, right? So if you end up having to buy something else that you didn't think and include in your budget, you would need approval to be able to do that, right? And with that budget in mind, we want to do all purchases by April 30th. So keep that in mind as you fill out the request in the budget, right? We hope to buy everything by April 30th of this year. So we would have to move fairly quickly once you are awarded for your proposal. Besides that, we want you to fill out the staff template for student researcher job description, which is going to be this form that you can see here on your screen. It's going to be the thing that we give to HR. And so you would describe the responsibilities, you would describe the requirements, right? Are there specific classes that the student must have taken? Are there specific certifications that the student must have completed? Are there specific experiences that the student must have had? And then with that, with all that in, we would submit that when it was time to hire students, right? Students to be hired have to have at least one semester left over. In other words, they have to be enrolled at least through the end of fall 2025. The other thing that's important to understand is that once we submit this here, you cannot have identified a student to work with, right? You might have one in your mind, but don't tell us about this, right? Because it's an HR requirement, right? The job will be listed on the jobs website for UNG once it's posted, and it's supposed to follow all the HR rules and regulations, right? You're going to have to go through some process to interview and hire people and select them, right? Don't list students ahead of time. Don't tell us that you have a student in mind. It's supposed to follow the basic HR rules of you're going to submit a job description. We're going to post a job description. You're going to have applicants, and then you're going to pick from those applicants, right? And then last but not least, you're going to have to certify a bunch of stuff, right? So it's going to be just a digital signature, check boxes, right? Make sure that you've discussed this application with your department chair, right? And so that you fit in with the whole thing with like not earning more than 27% of your academic salary during the summer, right? You're going to have to certify that you're committed to mentoring an undergraduate student on a continual basis, right? Again, what we want out of this is a good experience for our students, right? You certify that if you are working with human participants or personal data, you're going to have to get an IRB approval. You will certify that you understand that you have to attend all group meetings in person, right? And the students are supposed to participate in person in both the meetings and the workshops. At the end of years, you're going to fill out the mentor survey. And then at the end of it all, you're going to submit a post-award report summarizing the outcomes of the project, right? So that going forward, ideally, what we're going to happen is that we'll be able to see at the end of the project if the goals that you've set up and the products that you set up are either well on their way or they have been achieved, right? In terms of frequently asked questions, how can you tell if your project is appropriate for CURCA? Well, first of all, if it's creative, if it's going to be done by an undergraduate student, if it makes an original intellectual contribution, that falls under the undergraduate research, right? It doesn't matter if it's a play that you're trying to put together as, a theater major or a science project that works in the lab, right? So we don't limit our funding to the sciences. Any arts, humanities, etc., any department that's offered under UNG is eligible for us. The way that we decide who's going to get funded is we have a number of faculty members from UNG, from different fields and different departments and different colleges, who are going to get the rubric, get your submission, and go through the submission and score it based on the rubric. We add up the scores, we rank them based that way. You can teach the refuse, but remember the limitation of the 27% of their yearly salary. And students can take up to 4 class hours during the period kind of that covers fuse, right? But that's going to be the idea that it has to fit with their commitments to fuse, right? And so based on that, you'd have to work with your students to make sure that they are able to handle the course load that they're interested in signing up for, right? And to wrap this up before we go to the Q&A, you can split your 40 hours a week with however many students you want to fit. You can split the stipend with other faculty members. So if you want to have a two professor project and hire 4 students, that can work. We'll just make the splits, right? The faculty will meet every 2 weeks, right? And the students will meet every week. The faculty will be in every group meeting, which happens every 2 weeks, generally on Thursdays. And the students will have the group meetings and the workshops at the same time, right? And the idea here is that we want you to work very closely with your students so that at least you're contacting them, you're talking to them, you're giving them feedback on a weekly basis, right? So that, again, they are getting the experience, the feedback, the knowledge that we hope that they can get from working closely with you, their faculty mentor, right? So write the rubric, show that you're going to be working closely with the students and that you understand that the goal is to be a good mentor to your students. Write to a general audience because they're all going to be faculty members, but they're not necessarily going to be faculty members in your discipline or even your college. And if you've done Fuse stuff before, if you've done CURCA stuff before, remember to share the experience, the outcomes, and how this project is different from that one. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us through email, either our personal emails or through the CURCA email. And that's that. Allison, you can stop recording and then